Okay, welcome to the city's thematic day of the Singapore Pavilion. Our second panel is on Towards a City in Nature. We all know that nature and biodiversity are recognized to have wide-ranging benefits for cities, such as providing ecosystem services, strengthening resilience, and enhancing well-being. Our esteemed speakers will share and discuss how we can better assess the multifunctional benefits of nature-based solutions, how can cities integrate and enhance biodiversity with urban development. Our very first speaker is Signe Kongebro, Global Director of Future Resilient Design at Ramboll. Signe, please.
Thank you. Thank you. And I will be the first one. Yes. And my intro slide here is actually a project we have done in Singapore, Bishan Park. And that project is chosen because that was the first project we ever did with such an ambitious plan for biodiversity. And that has become sort of a beacon for us in all the projects we do around the world. But I will start with my hometown, Copenhagen. I'm born and raised in Copenhagen, and I want to share with you that we actually did a systemic change within one generation. So this is how Copenhagen looked 35 years ago, polluted, almost bankrupt, and with an unemployment rate of 18%. Super bad city. But over the years, we have become more and more livable due to a lot of things that we have been doing on design. Cleaning up the harbor, and suddenly the harbor became an asset. And now we have been sort of the leading city from a global perspective, becoming sort of the most livable over and over again. And that is due to a set of decisions that we did in the past. But as you see here on the slide, it also, we have to ask ourselves, what decisions do we need to make today in order to become resilient in 35 years' time? I think that is very important. Let me just put up my timer. So, and I will bring up one map here, and that is the new Copenhagen. We will be flooded soon because of the sea level rises. And of course, we in Ramboll, as a consultancy in engineering and architecture and landscape, we need to think about what is the new design paradigm. How do we actually create new design solutions on the edge towards the water that will be different from the ones we have today? And that will be part of our adaptation plan. It will cost thousands and billions of kroner, but for us, that will be our new strategic map. And we have put that into a catalog where we are looking into what will be the key design drivers for Copenhagen, and that is highly inspired by some of the work we have done in Singapore. I will show you one example of how I personally have been working with biodiversity as a key driver. Of course, biodiversity is not as mature, the sort of definition and how we are working with it, as it is in Singapore. But this is a new development done 3 kilometers from the city center of Copenhagen. It is going to be a district for 6,000 people, and the village will be a timber village. All buildings are made out of timber. But that is not my point here. My point is how to create a new urban district in pact with nature. How do you do that when you have nothing? So the idea was, how can we actually make sort of a new hierarchy from us humans being on top, but being part of the circle? We look back in time, and for 1,500 years, we have been developed, villages. They look like this. And that's, I think, in Europe, a standard village where you have this city center in the middle, and then it falls into nature. But in the same time, we need high density. How could you merge the village typology with a dense city? We created a new block where we took the best from the urban block and the village and merged that into a U-shaped stamp that falls into nature and on the legs. And by that we created a village, a new village with a very open framework in terms of it's not that precise like a square, it's something quite shaky. And then we created 3 neighborhoods, having all the landscape going through. I mean, it's quite basic, but, and this is how the plan looks. It looks quite odd, you would say, compared to a normal urban development in these days. But for us, it was a way to do risk management that the investor paying for this could actually have flexibility over time as time changes. And this is how you see the plan in the landscape. And what I want to talk about is how biodiversity influenced that design. So biodiversity is actually not a plan, it is a section. It is 3D, and I think that is a very important lesson, that it's not only about green cover, it is also how you design the section. And I will just give you some example of the detailed design, how you manage that in the Nordic country. So it's boardwalks, it's how the corridors are actually made. It comes down to design. You cannot just claim biodiversity on a plan. You need to develop a completely new vocabulary. Again, how to have small frogs passing through. The boardwalks, again, the height is important, that it has to be transparent for the animals. Edge zones. And I think one of the things that we learned from this project is that even though we build 60% of the site, we can triple the amount of species and increase the amount of species. And I think for me, that was a lesson learned in this project. We had a third party that did this assessment. But for me, as an architect, working with landscape, I really understood the power of design and landscape architecture, how much, if you think about and working with that knowledge, how much difference you can really make. And these are some images. And here I'm walking on the site. You can see that it's a timber construction going on. Then I will just touch upon then working with our global private clients like Volvo and Novo. Every time we go into a site, we do an assessment on a biodiversity net gain. And I think that is quite interesting for me, that it's not only a public demand, it is actually something that the private clients, owning big campuses, they start developing a campus by looking at the site's biodiversity. And then the whole design project starts from there. So for me, that new vocabulary, I want to credit Singapore for inventing how urban and nature works together. We are using that together with the private clients. And these are just some of the images from the Volvo campus. You can also see that the design is also different. And now to I love this project. I have also been part of that project from the very beginning. It is the North-South Corridor in Singapore. And to those who don't know that project, it is stitching together the city and the nature on 2 sides of a very dominant road. So you have to put all the cars underneath and then stitch together communities, neighborhoods, nature corridors together. But what I want to say here is that we have a problem with the cities, because growing cities all over the world are developing their own climate with more higher temperatures. So that is a pain point that doesn't sort of come from only the North-South Corridor, but that's just an example of projects where you can see that this is evident. So in this project, I want to highlight that knowledge. So we asked ourselves within the competition, what does a comfortable microclimate mean for Singaporeans' micro-mobility pattern? Could we change the mobility pattern on e-bikes and pedestrians just by changing the temperature? So we worked with this plan finding design solutions on, on the pavements, trees, super low tech. But how could we actually work with that data and knowledge, simulating while designing at the same time? And what we found out, that if we could lower the temperature 8 degrees by doing all these design things, and we could also see that led to that people would bike 5 times longer, and pedestrians could walk not only 100 meters, but actually 500 meters before getting like all sweaty. And that is magic for an urban, environment. We need people on the street and out of the cars. And here are some images of before and after. And again, this is how it looks. And this is how we imagine it. And here, the last one. And then I just want to touch upon our collaboration, because we have for many years worked together on projects. And we have created a publication last year on regenerative cities. And we are also doing the Lim Chu Kang project. It's all about food production and how we merge supply chain of food together with nature in the northern part of Singapore. And lastly, I must say, we can build a city worth investing and living in if we use every infrastructural investment as an opportunity to create better and more resilient cities. And if I had a beer, I would raise that and say cheers, because that is a proof of that. Thank you.
Thank you, Signe. Our second speaker is Ingrid Coetzee, Director, Biodiversity, Nature and Health at ICLEI Africa. Ingrid has more than 40 years' experience in sustainability, advocacy and governance, and has worked in national, subnational and city governance. Ingrid, please.
Thank you very much. And I'm going to talk to you today about biodiversity and mainstreaming that into city design, but also talk to you about Singapore Index on Cities Biodiversity. Before I start, I just want to say that my organization is a city network that's been around for more than 3 decades, and we work with cities in 125 countries around the world. And we're very happy and proud of the fact that we've had a very long and successful relationship with Singapore, where we've worked with the Singapore National Parks in developing the Cities Biodiversity Index, but also more recently, and that's where I met Andy, where we brought mayors from the whole ASEAN region together to gather and talk about the overshoot, the climate overshoot scenarios, and how cities and what cities should do to get biodiversity and nature in their cities. So if we talk about nature-based solutions, I'm not going to go into detail. I assume that everybody knows what this is about. There's the very famous IUCN sort of gold standard of nature-based solutions. But as an African, and I live in Cape Town, I want to say that one of the things that we've noticed is that often there are terms that come from the West, from Europe, like nature-based solutions, that don't necessarily sit very happily with us in other parts of the world. And so when we talk about nature-based solutions, we realize that there are solutions that nature presents to people, particularly where people have been living closely with nature. And what I think is important in working with cities, if we look at the types of gaps that they have, the governance gap, the planning gap, the finance and the data management gap. And we need to bring these together, and it's more than just nature-based solutions. So, for example, we've done some work where it was a Swedish-funded project, which we called Urban Natural Assets for Africa. You can see on the map, those are the cities that we worked with. And we really focused less on trying to force this methodology or this approach of nature-based solutions, but getting to the bottom of it and looking at the governance systems, looking at the investment and the finance structures, the data needs, etc. This next slide is just showing some examples of also nature-based solutions. ICLEI has offices throughout the world. This is an example from our European Secretariat, where they have a project called Nature Network, which is funded by the EU. And it's a compendium in a sense. It's a database. It's a depository of nature-based solutions. You can see on the map there the focus. And they have different types of resources and tools for cities. So this is just some of the sorts of things that we do for cities. This is another example of the Nature Network. You can see there's different themes. There's a code that you can use. And you can see the different types of tools and resources. We've also done some nature-based solutions work looking at case studies and best practices, also with a British university, the University of Durham. And in fact, some of the case studies that we submitted on the basis of our experience was actually from Singapore. So there you can see there's another one. But I think more importantly, and I mentioned the issue of finance just now, so there's been some really interesting work that we've done together with UNEP as part of the Generation Restoration Project under the decade on ecosystem restoration. And one of the components of this project was work around finance for nature, and specifically in cities. There were 2 reports. The second report was really interesting because it looked at the whole aspect of how much data is there about nature-based solutions in cities. And if you just think, one of the statistics that came out was that less than 0.3% of global spend on infrastructure is towards nature-based solutions. That's a very shocking picture, particularly if you think that ultimately in the longer run, the savings from a perspective of maintaining those nature-based solutions. So the point about data, building that data, getting more data to make more informed decisions is really important. So now let's talk about the city's biodiversity index. Where does this tool fit in? And I think it's a really important tool. I'm biased, I will admit, because ICLEI worked together with Singapore National Parks in developing this tool. But what it does, and it's been around for 2 decades, is it provides a self-assessment tool for cities to, with their own resources, with their own capacity and their own time, and with their own priorities, to identify those biodiverse or natural assets in the city, and to use that to inform all of the planning, all of the investment decisions, all of the policy decisions. It's flexible, it has a very strong base in science, it's easy to apply, and it offers a whole range of different solutions. And it was, the earlier version was probably a little bit more rigid, not that easy to apply, but just before COVID, we got together. It was IUCN, ICLEI, Singapore National Parks, the Secretariat of Biological Convention of Biological Diversity, and we reframed the whole thing and made it a whole lot more usable and adaptable. And already then we were starting to bring things in like climate, because in the previous version, climate wasn't a factor. It was very species focused. It's changed a lot. You can see, for example, there's a first part that looks at the sort of the biography, if you can call it that, of the city. And then if you look at this next slide, you can see the indicators on the left-hand side of the slide. It's divided into 3 different categories. It looks at the sort of species stuff. It looks at ecosystem services, which is a very important component of it. And then it looks at the governance and management. And it includes things like agriculture, because food security is a huge issue. It includes climate. It includes the whole notion of participation and stakeholder engagement, education, and very much the whole issue of capital, natural capital. What is the economic value? In the earlier session, some of the speakers talked about the economy, the value of biodiversity. So the index actually does look at that. So one of the things that we did, because the index in its original format, and I must say that it is recognized by the Convention on Biological Diversity as the gold standard for biodiversity assessments at the urban scale. Up till a few years ago, it was only available in a manual. You could only do it manually, and it was a spreadsheet that you had to do. It's great because all the formulas are worked out for you, but you still had to manually complete it. So what we did working with Singapore National Parks, we developed a digital version of it, and it is embedded and translated into different languages. It's embedded into a platform called Cities with Nature. Now, Cities with Nature has a history that is linked to Singapore, because we were, as a result of working with Singapore, we've been speaking to them about creating this platform and what are we going to call it, cities and nature, whatever. And eventually Leonard Chian from Singapore said, why don't we call it Cities with Nature? And that's the lovely story of that. So this is just an example of one of the cities. In fact, it's in my own country. It's a tiny little municipality, a district municipality called Waterberg. They're up near Botswana in the northern part of South Africa. They have a lot of wildlife. A lot of their economy is wildlife-based. So they've started using this, and you can see they've identified, for example, they're looking at the value of the species, etc. So that's just one example. And then these are some other examples. So obviously Singapore, which is used, it's a really great example because Singapore leads by example. There are many other instruments that we get, and they're not necessarily applied by the organization, but Singapore has really led by example. Montreal in Canada, another completely different part of the world, which we also work with very closely, they've used that index to evaluate progress in terms of its own local biodiversity strategy. So that informs the strategy and prioritization. Curitiba in Brazil, this part of the world, they've applied that index to assess habitat quality and align biodiversity targets with municipal sustainability practices. And then Cape Town, my own city, the index has used it to establish a baseline for local biodiversity monitoring. And with that, I'm going to say thank you very much.
Thank you, Ingrid. Our third speaker is Kotchakorn Voraakhom. Koch is Chief Executive Officer of Landprocess and Porous City Network. She is a UN Climate Change Action Award-winning landscape architect. Koch, please.
Thank you, Andy, and thank you, Hugh, for having me from the next door. So, Sawadee-ka, I'm from Thailand. And when you say neighbor glass is always cleaner. This is so true for us looking at from Thailand to Singapore. So I would like to share my case, my work, my experience in Thailand. And do you know what your city look like when the world hit 4 degrees Celsius? This is Thailand, and it's brown. And Singapore is also brown as well. And when you read, what does it mean? It means uninhabitable due to flood, drought, extreme weather. So we need to move to Norway to grow rice. At the end of this century, in 2100. So I think this is very concerning, and that's why we're all here together for this thing not to happen, hopefully. This is me when I was 7, and this is the flooding means to me. It's fun, the water is clean enough, we can play with flooding, there's nothing wrong with flooding at all. But this is the case in 2011, which is the most disastrous flooding in our history. Anyone who was there in Thailand during that time? Of course. The airport was closed, everything was shut down. Yes, so this is a very different experience, and this is our watershed, and this is what it looked like in that year. Crazy big mass of water had to go through Bangkok, but we don't want to get wet because Bangkok holds 1/3 of the GDP of the nation, and this is us. So we flood other people who's called Thai. And this is Southeast Asia. We are really vulnerable when it's come to the climate, when it's come to heat, rain. This is expecting right in 2021. This is the rain pattern. This is the rain pattern in Bangkok in 2050. 25 years from now, everyone still survive. Yes. But so in 25 years, there will be more 30% to 40% more rain But this is our standard infrastructure. You can see that what city today cannot even handle the situation of today. So what does it mean when you say regenerative city? We have no clue. This is a reality. This is what we realigning our 15 million people city with. Existing infrastructure. And don't just look at me, look at your city. It's maybe the same story. This is our sea level rise problem with all the shrimp farm. This is a pattern of 2050 of Bangkok, flood the whole city. And this is the boundary of Bangkok. It used to be land. And now it's take me 30 minutes to get there. This is real. So Bangkok this is very simple. We are very happy, creative people with water, of course. And this is without any policy aligned. This is how we handle the flooding. And this is very normal. Is that happen here in Brazil as well? I don't know, but crocodile is its friend in the ecosystem in the city. So this is very relevant to ask who emits the most in this conference. We are not even in the list. We are the rest of world. But when it's come to the extreme climate, we are the front line. What does this mean? So we either adapt, I think, or we die. I'm serious. So in 2012, I, as a landscape architect, won the competition called Centenary Park. And we don't have privilege to have like a park connecting like Singapore, like our neighbor. But this is the first park in 30 years. How old were you 30 years ago? I'm just kidding. Maybe you haven't born yet. Yes, it's okay. So yes, for 30 years, we haven't had one park. And how could that be? But our neighbor just like, connecting the parks and things. So the neighbor glass always cleaner. So I finished with the team, the first park in 30 years in central Bangkok. But it's not just the park. It's a park that inclined the whole park to collect every drops of rain. And of course, I'm going to go quick with the wetlands, and people can also use. So when you work with nature, it's co-benefit. It's not about just like containing water or park or going point A to point B, but I think how we work with nature is supposed to be co-benefit. And in Bangkok, we don't have summer, spring, fall, we don't care. We all have wet and dry. This is the only thing that we care from our experience being in that land. So only wet and dry. Maybe similar to Brazil. This is when the park opened in 2017, and this is 5 years later. So nature positive city is possible in one people's lifetime. And of course, pioneered by Singapore. And I hope we will grow our plan as quickly as possible to beat each other. And in a sudden, this guy came to my park, and I just like, what? So, of course, at that time, it's in 2018, but it's giving such a big hope to me as a landscape architect. Yes, you do something good, at least to the city. And he also helped cleaning the water in the park. Yes, it's very expensive water. But our conversation is really vivid to me till today. I told him that our city is sinking faster than the sea level rise. And of course, another one is the biggest urban farm rooftop in Asia. This is from the rice terraces. Very similar to your local wisdom on rice terraces around the world. If we think that the architecture is the mountain, why can't it slow down the water, produce food, create so many other things rather than just the building? Yes, Thammasat University. Have you been? How was it?
Love it.
Oh, you love it? Okay, very bad maintenance, but thank you. Oops, sorry. So this is another work at the center of Bangkok, which is turning this neglected infrastructure 40 years ago. Even my generation don't even recognize this infrastructure. And we actually turn it into a park bridge to connect people. So next time you go to Bangkok, please visit this place. It's now become a city landmark because you can see the view of Bangkok. So we don't have privilege of empty space. We only have to retrofitting what is there to actually create regenerative. So regenerative is not something from the empty. It's actually something from what you have. This is what we have as a canal, and we turn it into something green. This is probably, yeah, it's okay, but this is the first canal in the Venice of the East to become a park. Isn't it funny? And we have 1,600 canals that now are sewage and have ability to retrofitting the regenerative concept to be better. Yes. Back to the government aesthetic. Is your government building look like this? Come on. Yes. And we are all from like around the world, different country. Why the government have to say something like this? Symmetrical. And this is when the government think about landscape architecture. In my country, like potted plant, flowering something. So this is our government city. And it's very emotionless, not talking about people, very static. And to get there, you only have to drive. This is the relationship between people and the government. And this is how we're going to see our leader. So for 20 years, we're waiting. And this is the project that about to open next month. Regenerative government is equal regenerative city. We need to shift with the government, starting with do it first for the people. So this is the most biggest campus of the government. First thing, connect people to the transportation. Mitigation, low carbon city sounds very simple, but yes, it just happened. And it's about to open. And this is what the landscape looks like right there. And it's supposed to be parking space. But now it's a welcoming space for people to just walk from the SkyTrain to see your government through feet. And do you know why it's so curvy? Because I want my government to look more feminine. Is that okay? Yes, because the half of the government officer is female, like are female. Why the government have to have very masculine design, right? This is something that we need to welcome people. You can use femininity, welcoming with the civic plaza and then activities. The parking space can be more, can slow down the runoff. You're working with the architect. And this is not just a boring, banal parking space, but it can slow down the runoff, collect the rain, generate the energy for its own building. So we need to work together with an architect. And this is the upstairs of that parking space. We don't have privilege of empty space, so every surface in the urban setting needs to rethink. So that's the first part, and this is another aesthetic, 5.5 acre decorative pond. Huge, how many football field? So the concept is just to have this building have reflective pond for 20 years. So now I think that the government aesthetic needs to be shifted. So from this very big pond on top of the rooftop, which is leaking all the time for 20 years, crazy. This is government aesthetic. Formal scale, like non-human scale. So now we're retrofitting regenerative and turning this huge, I think it's the biggest decorative pond in my nation. Maybe in Southeast Asia. I don't know who want to be with us. So now it's turning to be a place for people a place for people to enjoy the insect, the pollinator, and this is what government should be rethink. And it's also cooling down the water. And from the surface, the concrete, the pond, but the greenery is actually giving you more, the best temperature. How many more minutes I have now? 5? Okay, sure. So this is what they prioritize the government from this to this. Make the feed, make the people first. So I think this is what we can do to shift our government so our lawn will be cleaner as well. So we're adding on 4 towns from blue green infrastructure, from 5-year return period of rain become to 125-year return period of rain, helping the whole campus holding on water like monkey chic, right? The concept of nature, how you hold the water is like how the monkey hold the food in its cheek. And this is my friend Pamela. We are both landscape architects. We're working with nature by low carbon adaptation technique for changing world. So we gather all of the work of the landscape architects from global south and global north, nature generative, whatever nature positive. It's not only from global north, it's actually for every nation because we always have nature. And we put all this example into the guideline and we want to share it with you. Yes. 1, 2, 3, quick. Bye. Okay. So, okay, go back. You have to be alert. Okay, this is what I'm on the field as a landscape architect. This is our landscape look like. And this is how government want us to face with flooding. And this is contagious. All Southeast Asia, maybe same in your country. And this is how it's actually mean. It's flood yourself because you thought that the flood's coming from the river. It's actually coming from the runoff and everywhere. So why do we build dam? It's gonna flood other people's more and it can flood your neighbors more. You probably get dry. So this is systematic. But when I show this photo to my people, they say, no, we don't want this solution. And when I ask them to sit next to their neighbor, that they're going to flood them more, they actually understand each other. Do you know this picture from? From the US, New Orleans. Oh, we don't want to be like you. I'm sorry. So this is from New Orleans. There are so many solutions in this conference, but pick the one that fit you. For this machine to suck down the carbon for us is only equivalent to 7,800 cars per year. We don't have the luxuries to invest on this thing. We have so many other things to do, but I hope we choose nature as our solution. Thank you.
Thank you, Coach, for the inspiring presentation. We have now come to the climax presentation of the Singapore Pavilion Cities Day, and this speaker needs no introduction. He is none other than Professor Winston Chow. Winston was elected co-chair of Working Group 2 IPCC in July 2023. He is also a Lee Kong Chian Professor of Urban Climate at the Singapore Management University. Winston, please.
Thanks, Sandy. Firstly, I'm afraid I'm the thorn among the roses, and I will be following up fantastic talks from Signe, from Ingrid, from Coach. I don't know how to follow up on that, so I'll do that by dropping a lot of science. So I apologize for being dry and technical, but in my talk, I want to just underpin the physical principles, the important, the machinery that drives the importance of having nature closely interrelated and embedded in cities. I'll give some talk about the ways to integrate the information into science-based policies, I'll use an example, forgive me, because we are in the Singapore Pavilion. I'll talk a bit about the Green Plan. I'll talk a bit about Long Island. But I'll also end with some work that we have done in SMU, Singapore Management University, that Signe will find very familiar, because I'll talk about Bishan Ang Mo Kio Park and how there is the strong evidence that nature-based solutions or ecosystem-based adaptation, which I hear from some of my South African colleagues, they do work, and it is an important solution in this day and age for climate change. So a little bit of the basis of how do trees, how do open fields, how does green walls, green roofs and park spaces, how do they work in the sense of reducing heat risk? I'll just go into heat first before moving on to other risks. In the last IPCC report, we've looked into several good research into looking that examines the causes behind the heat island. We note that there are factors related from the built environment with respect to city geometry, from what we call active or anthropogenic heat from human activities, the physical properties of concrete, of asphalt that stores heat, traps it during the day, releases it at night, that drives the nighttime heat island. That can be very substantial. But on the flip side, these are the drivers, these are the sort of implicit solutions. Blue infrastructure, green infrastructure, they have a massive role to play in reducing heat risk for communities, for infrastructures in cities. The basis behind it, this is from a recent paper from Liveable et al., looks into at the individual level, at the neighborhood level in the sense of streets, as well as the city level, on how trees, how green infrastructure can play a significant role through blocking solar radiation, through evapotranspirative processes, through shading, through allowing the sponge city effect that the previous panel talked about, water to infiltrate in, reducing flood risk in cities, and how the connectivity that you just have not just one individual tree, but a whole network of trees, the scalability of green infrastructure, the connectivity of green infrastructure allows you to enhance pedestrian thermal comfort, also allows the enhancement of energy saving benefits, which I talked about in the previous panel, the co-benefits between mitigation and adaptation, but also critically, something that is extremely germane and relevant for regenerative cities. How do you enhance the role of biodiversity? How do you allow spaces for flora and fauna to thrive within cities? The connectivity aspect at scale, best seen in this middle panel, illustrates that very well. Lastly, at the city level, what we find out is that if you increase the connectivity, if you increase the density of green spaces in cities, you will have exponential benefits. You will reap the benefits of green infrastructure when you apply that in scale. This applies for new and emerging cities, but also, as Koch pointed out, it is also very relevant in older cities where you have limited space and you can add in these elements. You will benefit from those physical properties that drive the importance and relevance of green infrastructure for regenerative cities. I'm going to, okay, hopefully this works. This is, you know where this is. This is Bishan Ang Mo Kio Park. This is when it is actually in flood. So Signe's presentation showcased it when it was not raining. The function of this water-sensitive urban design, this active, beautiful, clean principle that Singapore utilizes, is best seen, hopefully this works, yes. I filmed this during a very heavy rainstorm, probably similar to what we just experienced or what we have been experiencing over the past couple of days. All the surface runoff that is captured within the watershed is funneled through this regenerated water catchment feature. There's an infamous McDonald's there if you've been to Bishan Ang Mo Kio Park. The water doesn't actually go up to the top there, but it does flood naturally. And for many urban residents for that area who are not familiar with how a river should flood, if it is the first time they see it, they get stunned and they realize, hey, this is the power of green infrastructure. This is the power of nature-based solutions to stop flooding from happening in that catchment or in that immediate area. Within this area, there's a high density of public and private housing. There's about 250,000 people who live in that Bishan Ang Mo Kio catchment area. There are about 4 million people that visit that park annually, myself and my family included. It is a fantastic recreation space. It not only provides, as you'll see later, regulations of cooling of the environment, but also of flood control, but also as a space for recreation, a space for people to live in, who live there, to actually mix and mingle, to enjoy, to be healthy. And as Koch is no longer here, oh, there you are. As park spaces are wonderful places for people to gather, to enjoy life. And apart from also heightening biodiversity, that's something that the quantification of these ecosystem services, the natural capital has to be accounted for if you want to make sure that the scientific basis of green infrastructure can be translated into important policy. Also, within the mitigation space, it's not just risk reduction. We are looking into how for particular city types, for typologies of emerging cities, of cities that are rapidly growing, expanding horizontally and vertically, as well as established cities that are in place, which all of us, I guess, in Singapore are very familiar with. What are the levers? What are the potentials for reducing emissions across different sectors? But particularly of interest, I should focus here on land and ecosystem. Note that the role of green infrastructure is very strong. The potential for mitigation, of sequestering carbon, of reducing energy use, of reducing water use is so strong for your fast-growing cities and emerging cities, especially in Southeast Asia. While Krung Thep, Bangkok, Singapore, Manila, we are mature cities, the fastest rates of urbanization where people go to, where capital is being developed, are in your Chiang Mai's, are in your Surabayas, are in your Cebu, are in your Johor Bahru's. That's where the role of green infrastructure in the rapidly growing urban environment should be noted as a significant lever, as a significant solution for climate change. What do we do with all that information of excellent flood control, of excellent temperature regulation, of useful ecosystem services? You want to apply that into policies. Now, there are many other case studies where fantastic cross-siloed thinking, or fantastic inclusivity of stakeholders in making sure long-term solutions work, particularly for nature-based solutions. But I'm going to pick the one that is, because in the Singapore Pavilion, the Singapore Green Plan. There are 5 or 6 different pillars that underpin the Green Plan for 2030. Note what is the first one. That is implicitly the priority of the importance of nature, of the importance of greenery, with that Singapore has placed a high premium of. The role of planting more trees, the role of developing new park spaces that are connected, adding in 1,000 hectares or 1,000 football fields of size in Singapore is right front and center in the implementation of the principles of the Singapore Green Plan. Also, this was shown earlier if you attended the first panel where Minister Chee Hong Tat talked about the Long Island project. I live somewhere here, close to the airport. I'm an East Coast kid, for those of you who are in Singapore. When we talked about the fears of the existential threat that we face from climate change in Singapore, the thing that scares lots of people in government and scared, I would say, the former Prime Minister is that of sea level rise. How do we make sure that as a small island state, we can deal with the issues of a rising sea, we can deal with the issues of higher flood risk? One of the ways to do so is to implement this reclaimed land of an additional land space of Long Island. It has, as I previously said, a lot of ecosystem services. You have a green space, a park connector, you add in a new freshwater reservoir to deal with the issues of water scarcity that Singapore faces. You have more land for future national developmental needs. You have more opportunities for recreation spaces. So this will be a very nice linear park to augment the existing linear park at the East Coast. So this can only happen when you understand the scientific basis is strong and you can apply that across many different agencies at governments and many different bottom-up communities that will stand to benefit from having more green infrastructure in place. So from the own work that I do, I want to plug a little bit on how we bring in the heat resilience, heat reduction, heat adaptation issues into the discussions on heat mitigation on the Singapore Green Plan. We do so through the Cooling Singapore project that I've been working on since 2017. What we've been doing is compiling what sort of solutions work for reducing heat exposure, for increasing thermal comfort, We have a compendium of about 86 well-known strategies. They're nothing new. We can have a discussion after the talk to see what those are. We've developed also a digital urban climate twin to see what combination of these solutions can work. What we found is that it's not just all sorts of trees that work in Singapore. Singapore is a very low wind environment. We have absolutely crappy wind conditions. We have no opportunities for wind power. And as you know, in a hot environment, a humid environment, if there's no airflow, it will suck, as we have been experiencing here without the fans yesterday. You need to pick and choose the right types of trees, the right combination of trees to allow for strong pedestrian airflow while at the same time increasing the shade provision, blocking in the solar radiation, increasing evapotranspiration. You're looking into those combinations which you can model through this digital twin that we've developed, and government agencies are utilizing that. The solutions have been garnering some attention from the New York Times and so on and so forth, but we realize that data by itself doesn't answer the question. How do we relate it to the humanity that lives and plays and breathes in cities? This is where, the talk that Koch gave is so important, because the lived experiences of people engaging with green infrastructure, engaging with nature in the city is so important. How do you quantify the cooling that you get from reduced sunlight exposure, from increased evapotranspiration, from better wind flow? We do so with a mobile platform, a mobile micro-meteorological platform that we call Smarty. We dragged it around my university campus to see which parts of the urban environment, whether they're protected by natural shading, whether they're protected by building shading, in terms of applying previous local knowledge of verandas and 5-foot ways, where the built environment actually provides shade structures integrated with building design. You can actually see significant drops of places within the urban environment that Smarty can pick up. And that sort of data is so important to showcase to policymakers that, look, smart urban design, nature-based solutions, the combination of this has massive, significant benefits for people living in cities. Additional work, Bishan Ramboll Park, we've measured that the cooling is about 2 to 3 degrees Celsius, 3.5 degrees Celsius maximum. Interestingly enough, it also expands into the urban environment, into the built environment as well. So there is that documented cooling. We learn from that information, we put it into urban design for high-rise environments in new residential estates in Singapore, to make sure that what we've learned from the scientific assessment can be implemented into planning and design. I think I also missed out something about finance or green spaces. Hugh, ask me about that later, for the interest of time. But I will end with this, and I'm very, very glad to be speaking last, because these are points that have been spoken to by Signe, Ingrid, and by Koch. It's one thing to have good data. How do we translate that into effective policy, into translating science into regenerative cities? I can think of 4 ingredients and also examples of those ingredients that can work, that we've seen, not just for Singapore, but for other successful cities. First is understanding the processes of ecosystem service provision through green infrastructure. You can see this therefore enables adaptation, mitigation, and critically, biodiversity conservation. If you were to understand the role that park spaces play in allowing habitats for native species to come in, or for migratory birds, for instance, in Singapore, that make the trip every winter from north to south and vice versa. Those are good landing zones, and you can see biodiversity thrive. Second, you need to develop enablers to scale these green infrastructure projects to reap the benefits of size. Cross-silo planning, financing, community involvement is so critical if you want to accelerate and scale up how successful green infrastructure projects work. If more people understand the benefits of green infrastructure, you will get more buy-in and more funding, perhaps. Third point, linked to the second, ensure a strong budget, long-term finance is aligned. It is not a short-term commitment, it is a multi-year commitment to make sure that green infrastructure works. So Koch talked about the Thammasat University Rangsit campus rooftop garden. She alluded to the issues of maintenance. It's one thing to install the green infrastructure, you need to also remember to maintain it well. And lastly, ensure that the project is monitored, evaluated consistently. This is where Ingrid's point about data, about monitoring, about measurement it is so important to evaluate the efficacy and effectiveness of green infrastructure that is put into place to make that business case to be successful. I believe that is it. I'll end again with a plug. This was mostly of my research work, but I'm also working a lot on the IPCC front. I'll be speaking at 2 talks tomorrow morning at the IPCC Science for Pavilion from 9 to 12 with my co-chair colleague Bart van den Hurk. Very happy to be here, and hopefully we can carry on the discussion through Hugh's good hands in moderation after this. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Winston. We will now have the moderated panel discussion. Our moderator is Hugh, Executive Director of Centre for Liveable Cities. May I now invite the panelists to take your seat on the stage. Panelists, please.
Well, thank you very much, panelists. I think it's been a breathtaking set of presentations on this topic of becoming a city in nature. And we have very global, very scientific, but also very real local examples where our panelists have shared from their own observations and experience. So I have a short list of questions for the panelists. And thereafter, time permitting, we will open up for more Q&A from the floor. Let me start with Winston, based on your own reminder as well. So, Winston, how can cities measure and communicate the economic value of nature-based solutions to attract investors? And what are the gaps in understanding or points of alignment that's required to put stakeholders on the same page in order to unlock financing and sustain investments in nature-based solutions?
Thanks, Hugh. Firstly, you need to make the business case for NBS very, very clear. In order for it to happen, it takes a village of people to showcase that it works through the scientific assessments and studies. It takes the sort of understanding or quantification of making the unquantifiable quantifiable through natural capital, through economic, environmental economics and other issues like that. But it also requires the understanding of communities who benefit from the nature-based solutions to either spread the word or to tell people this solution works. Anything that works well, that deals with the climate crisis, will get massive take-up elsewhere. There was one slide which I forgot to mention that I was so distracted by the flooding that there was some text pointing out examples of Bishan Ang Mo Kio Park. It's quite a large park. It's about 62 football fields in size, covering that covers that area. There is a study showed that the value of flood risk reduction, the value of temperature regulation, and critically the value of improved health of people who use that park for exercise, for people who use that park to play, runs in the hundreds of millions of dollars. And that is substantial by any measure of quantification. From a more selfish point of view, for the homeowners of the parks who live next to the park spaces, there was a study done by folks from the Nature-Based Solutions Group, the Center for Nature-Based Solutions Group at the National University of Singapore. They looked into what is the value of property adjacent to the green spaces versus property of similar size, of similar, of floor heights because of high rise, which didn't have access to green spaces next door. And there was about an 8 to 10% increase in home value for resale for those public houses that were at Bishan Ang Mo Kio Park. So you have the sort of broader community benefits you can quantify, but there's also the personal sort of, hey, if I want to sell my house, I'm living in a place that has high value because of the green spaces, I'm going to benefit from that. But again, these data have to be communicated well. It has to be shown to work. And I think the examples from Bishan Ang Mo Kio Park, the examples from Bangkok, they are along the right sort of good cases that can spread the message of how the economic value of green infrastructure is so important.
Thank you very much, Winston. And pivoting to Signe, Ramboll's projects from Singapore's North-South Corridor to Copenhagen's cloudburst management and North Haven developments highlight the power of long-term partnerships and co-designing with the community. Could you share with us what lessons you've learned about sustaining these collaborative relationships, especially over time, to ensure that the regenerative design continues to develop impacts across generations and not just for that immediate beneficiary? Over to you, Signe.
Yes, thank you for a good question, because I think two things matters here if you want to sustain a prosperity and resilient neighborhood. And that is the ability, political vision, that you actually have a dream of something, that you dream for something that is 30 years ahead. And the other part is that you need agencies that are not sort of the municipal level. It's not citizens, but it is an operating agent that can take care of the vision and make that into play. And I think that is also where Singapore and Copenhagen looks like each other, because we have agencies taking care of the land use and everything that's sort of being operational, and you have the same. So for me, those two players, the long-term vision and the ability to operate through agencies.
And moving to Koch, can I ask you, how can cities move from planning to implementation when it comes to nature-based solutions? And what practical steps or enabling conditions make the biggest difference on how we can embed it into policy to enable the ability to scale up?
Well, I guess to scale up things, you need to work with government. And that's why we are here. And I think when you work with government and when you work with nature, nature has no boundary. But government have so many silos. Like, I want to fix one street in Bangkok. I need to go through like 10 agencies of government just to make them understand that this is no boundary. So I think to really scale things up, and especially where we are at COP, we need to break silo. Silo in national level, sub-national level, silo in profession, landscape architect, urban design, and also silo in how we understand nature. Like how you understand nature. Like Brazilian people say, if forests die, we die. I think we need to understand the same importance of nature. Not even nature-based infrastructure yet, but the nature is actually part of us and we are part of them. I think that's still really like a story to tell why nature-based solution and nature infrastructure is so important. So to scale up, storytelling need to be there plus data. Yes.
Thank you very much. And we do think that the data itself tells a story. So I'm going to come to Ingrid. The Cities with Nature platform and the Singapore Index are helping cities measure and report on their biodiversity progress. So how do these tools strengthen accountability and link local action to global biodiversity targets under the Kunming-Montreal Global Diversity Framework? Over to you, Ingrid.
Thank you. And that's a very important question, especially as we are moving from Berlin to Yerevan next year, where there will be the Biodiversity COP. And it's an important COP because it meets the sort of halfway target between when the framework was adopted in Montreal and 2030, which is one of the first big milestones. Whether we are already now doing a biodiversity stocktake. In other words, where are we as a world in terms of meeting those biodiversity targets? So what the platform, the Cities with Nature platform does, and a tool like the Cities Biodiversity Index, is to create a space, and both of them, the platform and the Cities Biodiversity Index, are recognized by the CBD Convention. The platform is recognized as a commitment and reporting platform for cities and subnational governments. They don't have a mechanism of reporting other through this particular platform. Many countries do not count, they do not report on what happens at the local level. Yet we know from experience there's more activity and action and effort happening at local level. And we're seeing increasingly bodies such as the UN, IUCN, even the CBD Convention, the Secretariat, recognizing that if we're going to meet these global targets, it's going to stand or fall by what's happening at local level. So what these platforms do, as I said in my presentation, the index provides a very user-friendly but very scientifically based instrument that cities can use that's done in a way that they can choose. They can pick and choose. It's not a cookie cutter. Depends on your particular local context, on your priorities, etc. So you can set your own baselines. It's embedded in Cities with Nature because it links to all of the 23 global biodiversity targets. And in the way that we've set it out, we've taken these global targets and put them in a way that makes sense for the mandate and the governance of cities. So we interpret the global target in terms of a city's functions. And then we link it to two things. First of all, we link it to the city's biodiversity index. In other words, if you do not have a baseline, this is the index particular criteria that you should go to. And the other thing is we link it to the SDGs, because cities understand SDGs. And although many of them don't have to report against biodiversity, increasingly they all understand the SDGs. And what we've done is there was a decision taken last year at the COP, decision 1632, which talks about reporting, and it talks about how it must happen. And we're using that as an instrument, working with the CBD so that we take the data, the commitments already made on the Cities of Nature, seamlessly go into the CBD's clearinghouse. We already have something, and it's not, although the platform has almost 400 cities that have joined it, it's a voluntary platform. We've already got almost 2,000 commitments that we are feeding in, and we've got a huge drive at the moment to get more cities to make their commitments.
Thank you very much. We have a few minutes left, so I'd like to open the floor for questions from the audience. Do you have any questions for our esteemed panelists, please? And could you introduce yourself and where you're from? Thank you.
Thank you for a really interesting session. My name's Keris Jones, and I'm the co-focal point of the UNFCCC farmers constituency in this process. So I'm going to really ask a practical question coming from the agricultural community. I was wondering about the links between urban and rural communities, where you source the plants and flowers for your nature-based solutions, whether there are opportunities there. And I think the second associated question was around the long-term commitment of such solutions and whether you were thinking about the impacts of climate change on those nature-based solutions and embedding that in your business case. Thank you.
Can I invite members of the panel?
Maybe I would like to comment on the long-term and the business case, actually, because what we have seen now is that there is a correlation between access to nature and neighborhood prosperity. And I think it's not, I know it's hard dollar. We talk about, house prices and all that, normal stuff. But what we also see is the social sort of belonging, feeling attached to a place, feeling safe, less lonely. And this is some of the studies we are doing with a whole department of economic. And I think on top of the long-term thinking, we need to add that type of science into the play, because that will be so easy to explain to the business case that it's not only about temperature, as I presented, but it's actually about creating prosperity in the neighborhoods.
Thank you. Just on that point around urban-rural linkages, I think it's a very important one, and I'm glad you raised it, because it's certainly something that we work with when we work with cities around the world. this platform, Cities of Nature, has a system platform called Regions with Nature, and that's exactly where the urban-rural linkages come in. But also, if you look at the targets, there are targets that speak to the whole point of agriculture. The CBI has urban agriculture as one of its criteria, just as an example. So yes, it's very important, it is addressed, and it's certainly, given things like food security, it's something that's becoming increasingly important.
Quickly, maybe,
Yeah.
if part of the question was on how the green infrastructure is managed or has native flora that's used, that I think, I'm not from the National Parks Board, I'm just a humble climate scientist, but I've worked with enough, and I worked in that environment where it is very clear that a lot of thought is put into the role of native species that can thrive in the environment. It's also applied in the sort of thinking for coastal ecosystems, not for just for Singapore, but for neighboring Indonesia as well. When we look into coastal mangroves, you have to look into the right kinds of pneumatophores and other species that are by the coast that can help as a bulwark against sea level rise and against coastal erosion. And that's the start, that's the anchor. From then, you've got the various fauna species that show up with butterflies, migratory birds, otters, which are very famous in Singapore, but also the not so charismatic fauna. In my field work there, I have seen black spitting cobras, which are also native to Singapore, by the way, that have made Bishan Ang Mo Kio Park their home. And it can pose quite a bit of challenge, especially when they are the ones that spit out venom, for which children, which are curious, might be very tempted to go and approach. So we take the good with the bad.
I just want to add on the urban setting and suburban areas. But for me, working a lot with floodings and things, and agriculture city, but when it's come to the water, we need to talk watershed. I think we need to blur every boundary that we think we're supposed to work on. This is city and you are not. Because city cannot survive itself like Bangkok. But to save Bangkok is to save the whole watershed rather than to save Bangkok and thinking of Bangkok as an island and forget everyone. I don't think that's fair. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think that speaks to the very holistic approach that we need to take in managing our cities in the future, and importantly, leading our people with providing the right values and instincts, even as we develop cities for the future. Any other questions on the floor, please? Yeah.
I just want to pick up.
Say something. Okay, thank you.
I want to pick up on the point that you made about watershed. It's so important. Somebody mentioned, I think in the earlier session, the problem in Cape Town. I live in Cape Town. We ran out of water. We were doing with less than 20 liters of water a day for everything. And the solution was, they tried everything. They drilled for water. They had desalination plants. We carted water in from the rest of the country. But the long-term solution lay in the catchment. And what they started doing, in South Africa, we have a huge problem with invasive species from Australia that they settle in the riverbeds. And we don't have rivers like this. A lot of our rivers are underground. So what these trees do is they sap up the water. And what the city started doing was outside of the municipal boundary, in the catchment, taking out the invasives. And that freed up the water. So perfect point that you made. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. We have
Over to you, sir.
Parish from Global Environment Centre in Malaysia. The point about water is a very key one. I think with the changing climate, we're going to be faced with two things. Dry season, not enough water. Wet season, too much water and flooding. And urban areas are going to get the brunt of both of those things. And I think that there's starting to be a trend in Asia, some Asia countries, about thinking about creating wetland, the so-called sponge city model of creating wetland systems in the city to absorb the flood water, absorb the drain water, be a source of water supply. But those wetland systems can also be a great center for biodiversity for multiple use. So how do we encourage that? Of course, in the dense city, it's very difficult to think about how to bring in wetland systems. But I think for the future with the climate change, we really need to look at that. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't know, Winston, do you want to make a comment on Long Island since you have you illustrated that in your presentation?
If I may, following on from what I said about the importance of the business case in flood regulation, which is such a big problem, KL, in Georgetown, in Penang as well. So if there is, what I talked about for Long Island is something of a solution. The top-down planning is one aspect, but the buy-in, the messaging to say that this works not just from the pure business case, but in terms of the other sorts of provision of ecosystem services that these nature-based solutions can provide is so important. It's also the other big issue, and given the rivalry between Malaysia and Singapore and how it affects water supply, having an additional reservoir also is an important element. So you get buy-in through that sense. But I also want to point out, not just for the communication aspects, but the education aspects is so critical to make sure that these solutions are sustainable for the long run. I'm a city boy. My dad grew up in Malaysia. He went in a kampong. Nature to him was very straightforward. The commode was outside from the city. You did your business out from the house. You don't have that here. Everything's all plugged in. I fear for a future where my children and their friends think that chicken comes from a can, and they don't roam around from the kampongs like what we see in Malaysia and Singapore. Having that connection, that sort of societal connection, that personal connection with nature that NBS provides through green infrastructure and such is so important to make sure that these solutions can be for the long term and can be managed by people who walk in the path behind us. Along the path.
Can I just add here a comment? Because I think this discussion is sort of buildings or nature. And I think we will see hybrids in the future, not only as you showed it, but where we will see wastewater plants. We will see new urban infrastructure merging into the cities. And we as citizens of cities, we will have to get used to living up against with a neighboring wastewater plant that is not smelly, that actually is a food producing or a brewery, as we saw earlier. It will be something that will transform into new cathedrals of the city and cathedrals for the future. And I think water is essential here because we have either too much, too little, and too dirty.
Thank you. And I think we have one more question here. Please go ahead.
Thank you. I'm a graduate student at Harvard University studying sustainable development, and I was wondering if any of you have any advice for young professionals who want to work with city infrastructure to increase resilience against climate threats and are just very intimidated about breaking into the industry.
Okay, I think if I could answer, because you need to have an ambition. You will have to work cross-silo, as your point is. That is mandatory.
Yeah.
But you need a can opener. You need either data, you need vision, you need design skills to do that. That will be your core language, but you need to have empathy for so many other professions and being able to listen and be more quiet.
Koch, maybe you have some advice or something?
Yes, I think when we talk about younger generation, there are answers to the future. But I think to gloom the future answer, like we need to work intergenerationally, because I feel for the younger generation is so much on their weight, right? And they feel so depressed and they don't know how to deal with the climate change. But I think it's an intergenerational answer that we need to go together and we need to gloom them together. And I think just your answer is already, just your question is already the answer in itself. That's why we all here. That's what we care for. but how can we spread this hope, fear, the wish that we have for the future, and it's already seed in us. Maybe you have a longer years and we have a shorter years, but the future is seed in us. And I think we all have different answer, but we need to mix that answer together. So just offer what you have. That's what you can offer. I think that's a very basic that nature teach us. Like, be yourself, offer more, be co-benefit. Don't just very single-minded. And I think this is a platform for all of us to grow for the future answer. Thank you.
Thank you. Final word, Winston.
Really? Ingrid, do you want to say anything? No. Fantastic question. I wish I had asked that question 25 years ago. Two things. One, learn to listen. In places like this, so much talk goes on. Maybe not in this pavilion, over there in the negotiation. So much talk. Learn to be quiet, listen, and think. Far too often, people just say the first thing that comes out of their mouth because they think, oh, I'm trained in climatology, I'm trained in sustainable development, I'm trained in this and that. Learn that when people say something, their own lived experiences, which Koch talked about so importantly in Bangkok, is important in trying to find a solution that can enable sustainable development, that can enable the sustainable development goals. It's a learned skill, and you only get that from wisdom, from over time, and all the other stuff that happened. And second is, don't lose hope. Don't lose hope. Please don't. You become cynical, and cynicism is very bad. And hopefully the stuff that goes on in this forum, in this pavilion, in other pavilions will inspire rather than make people discouraged.
Okay, thank you, panelists. Can I now invite Hugh to give the closing remarks for our Cities Day at Singapore Pavilion? Hugh, please. Yeah, panelists, please remain on stage. We'll take a group photo later. Yeah.
So I think you can all agree that's been a very hopeful and encouraging session, and we've had very inspiring presentations from our panelists. So I myself have been very much heartened by the insightful discussions, the vibrant networking that takes place in sessions like these, and not just here, but across the different pavilions. And we've had the privilege to cross-share and to be able to speak to others. I've learned new organizations, people with great vision, really to bring things forward. So notwithstanding what happens, sometimes in the negotiations, I think everyone in this room, everyone here actually has great agency to do something. And to the final question, I would add my own view that there is a tendency for us to fall back on tradition and convention, but these are unfamiliar times for all of us, in the built environment included. And where the built environment coincides and sometimes clashes or overlaps with nature, there is actually a great potential for us to break out of the mold and to find new ways forward. Because this is really what human ingenuity is about. This is what cities as centers of innovation are meant to do. It's not to perpetuate the status quo that has brought us to where we are today, but really to break out of the status quo. And I think we've seen some really inspiring examples of projects which are breaking the status quo, which says that the way we've done it is not the way forward. So actually, there is great potential for that. And if you're a newcomer to the industry, actually, you have the best position to come up with something new and not necessarily to follow the convention of the past. So the two panels of Cities Day on resilient and regenerative cities and a city in nature, they have discussed pathways that we could take towards more resilient and regenerative urban development and emphasize both the critical role of nature and nature-based solutions, but importantly, as we've seen, how do we couple that with the ingenuity of the humans in the loop? And from the discussions, we can distill the 5 important enablers that can enable a resilient and regenerative approach. One is long-term and place-based planning. Secondly, the supportive policies that cities and governments need to put in place. the use of digital tools and artificial intelligence, things that enabled us to see things that perhaps our predecessors could not see in the past. Of course, sound financing and measurement mechanisms, but making sure that we measure what matters and not measure for the sake of doing it. And importantly, how do we sustain strong partnerships across the public, private, and people sector, and of course between cities. So climate change, as we recognize, is real. It's very much upon us today. It's not a distant problem. It's something that we have to confront and take on today. So no one in the room has all the solutions, but if we come together regularly at sessions like this, we can exchange knowledge, we can get inspiration from things that help us to break the mold, because something that you observe in another city could well be adapted and implemented in our own cities. So we like to share more cross-collaborative stories and case studies. The 2 issues that we have released from the Center for Liveable Cities on resilient and regenerative cities are available for download, and you can read more from leaders and experts in this publication. I'd like to take this final opportunity to invite you in the room to continue the journey with us at the 10th edition of the World City Summit, which will be held in Singapore from the 14th to the 16th of June 2026. So thank you, and let's continue to work towards a resilient and regenerative future for all our cities.
Thank you so much. We have come to the end of Cities Day. Panelists, maybe we can take a group photo together. Yeah. You want to say something?
Can we also take photo with all of you? Yeah? Okay. Yeah? Okay. We do the panel first. Don't leave us. We come from far. Don't leave us.